Um, First of all, good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone tuning in. It is my honor to open webinar on advancing Australia-India Defence Industrial Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Now, this conversation today feels both timely and necessary. We're not starting from scratch here. We are building on a genuine momentum, particularly India Australia Defence Industry Business Roundtable, which was held in Sydney on 10th October 2025. It was organized by CUTS International in partnership with Australia India Business Council and Newland Global Group as the industry execution partner. That gathering marked the significant milestone. It was the first time such a roundtable was co chaired by ministers at ministerial level of both the countries. Now, the presence and leadership of the Defense Minister, Rajnath Singh and Peter Khalil, sent a very clear signal. This partnership is no longer aspirational, it became operational and increasingly industrial. If you look at the trajectory of Australia-India defense ties over past few years, the shift is quite striking. What was once framed largely in terms of strategic alignment, shared values, converging interest, and a mutual commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific has now moved firmly into the realm of practical cooperation. What we are seeing now are more structured dialogues, more joint exercises, and more importantly, a growing recognition that defense industrial cooperation is the backbone of any sustained strategic partnership. Now, the Indo Pacific is undergoing a period of rapid change. Supply chains are being rethought. There's a technological competition which is intensifying. The traditional procurement models are proving insufficient. And it is in this environment that countries like India and Australia are not just partners of convenience, but they are partners of necessity. At the same time, there are challenges like regulatory frameworks, differing procurement systems, industrial scale, and even business cultures, which can create a friction. These are not insurmountable barriers. In fact, forum like Sydney Roundtable, which we did, and today's webinar exist precisely to surface these issues and work them constructively. One of the most promising ideas to emerge from our recent discussions and deliberation is the concept of defense and innovation bridge between India and Australia. And it's a simple but very powerful idea. We want to connect ecosystems like startups, research institutions, industry players, and allow innovation to flow more freely between the two countries. If implemented well, this could significantly accelerate capability development while also strengthening supply chain resilience. We hope that today's webinar brings out ideas and solutions toward this journey. We have some excellent panel of practitioners and experts who have been closely involved in shaping this evolving partnership, from policy and military leadership to research and industry. And we hope that their perspective help us unpack both opportunities and practical pathways forward. And as we begin, I would encourage everyone to think of this not as a discussion, but a part of a longer journey. The foundations have been laid through high-level political commitment, structural dialogues, and the growing industry interest. The task now is to translate that intent into tangible outcomes, into joint projects, deeper industrial linkages, and sustained collaboration. On that note, let me thank you all for being here today. And with that, I would hand over the floor to our moderator and chair for this discussion, Major General Dr. Abhay Dayal. Sir was former Indian Army veteran with nearly 4 decades of distinguished service, have commanded frontline formations and served in key staff instructional roles. He is former UN military observer in Democratic Republic of Congo and has also spent over 7 years in defense procurement. He was retired in March 2025 as Additional Director General Technical and now contributes to policy and strategic discourse. We welcome you, sir, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjali. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So good afternoon and Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure for me to moderate this session on advancing Australia-India defense industrial cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And if I could simply state, and as Anjali also mentioned, that this conversation today is both very timely and essential. India and Australia today share a very clear alignment on the principles of a free, open, and rules-based Indo-Pacific. And you would all know, I'm sure, in Australia's 2026 National Defense Strategy, India also occupies a very prominent position as the top tier security partner. It's been mentioned, but at this moment, you would agree that strategic convergence without industrial convergence would remain incomplete. As mentioned by Ms. Anjali, and those of you who had been following the events and activities organized by Cuts International would recall that the Made in India Australia Defense Industrial Business Roundtable that was conducted in Sydney on the 10th of October 2025 last year uh, came out with a lot of tangible areas in which we could work together. Several key areas of defense cooperation between the two Indo-Pacific neighbors, if I may call, were identified in these deliberations that ensued there. And as a logical progression, the next phase of this partnership must move beyond dialogue and exercises towards co-development, co-production, and ensuring resilient supply chains, which is the need of the day. All this in the defense industrial ecosystem. So today's webinar is a series of follow-up initiatives to identify these actionable way forwards, take them up so that we can go into a logical sequence. A lot of times one may ask, why Australia? Next question could be, why now? And why does this cooperation matters? So as I understand it, my very simple take on it is, firstly, the strategic environment is becoming more contested and technology driven by the day, as we are all observing. Supply chains are getting increasingly weaponized, and over dependence on a single source is a vulnerability which neither country can afford. Also, secondly, both India and Australia are seeking greater sovereign compatibility, not autarky, but trusted partnerships that enhance resilience. And thirdly, and most importantly, I feel that there's a strong complementarity between India and Australia, where India brings the scale, cost-effective manufacturing, and a rapidly expanding innovation ecosystem, if I may say that, to the table. While as Australia provides advanced R&D, niche technologies, and system integration expertise. So if it is aligned well, this would not only be just bilateral cooperation, it would contribute to regional stability and, of course, capacity building across the Indo-Pacific. So the next question comes as to what can be the tangible areas of cooperation between these two countries. There were a few identified during the roundtable in Sydney, and there can be many more. There could be a long list, but to just name a few, some of it will be discussed today. It could be maritime domain awareness, undersea capabilities, cyber security and cyber defense, aerospace, defense manufacturing ecosystem, emerging and critical technologies, defense electronics, supply chains, as I mentioned, logistics, sustenance, MRO, life cycle. I mean, the list could go on. On some of these aspects and more, today we have the privilege of hearing the views of three of our expert panelists whose contribution in their respective fields is path-breaking and phenomenal. You'll realize this when I mention their introduction to you all. I have the honor now to introduce our panelists for you. Firstly, we have with us today Captain Sarabjit Singh Parmar. He is a distinguished fellow in the Council of Strategic and Defense Research. And not only this, he's a distinguished fellow in a whole lot of other very reputed bodies. Captain Sarabjit is a naval veteran. He is a distinguished research analyst with a long history of working in the think tank ecosystem. He focuses on issues related to maritime strategy and security in the Indo-Pacific. National security, maritime security strategies, doctrines and concepts, piracy and legal aspects, all with specific focus on maritime affairs, are the areas of his specialty. So we are actually looking forward to Captain Sarabjit to cover this particular aspect, which is really not very, not known to very many of us. Next, we have Mr. Amit Shah. He is the founder and CEO, Jira Enterprise Space, which is an Australian launch vehicle company pioneering modular, high frequency, and sovereign access to orbit. He is a seasoned strategist with over 2 decades of experience across business transformation and program delivery. He has led complex programs for global enterprises before transitioning into space entrepreneurship. Under his leadership, Jira Enterprise Space was selected for the Amazon Web Services Space Accelerator Program 2025, positioning the company among the most innovative startups in the Asia Pacific region. And I see from the records, Jira Enterprise also attended the Sydney Roundtable, so he's the one connector between all of us. He's currently working on an Australia-India aligned aerospace and defense platform focused on modular systems and cross-border industrial collaboration, which would reinforce sovereignty, compatibility while fostering global partnerships. So with this wonderful background, we are so looking forward to hearing you, sir. And next we have Mr. Chris Mills. He's the director, UNSW Defense Research Institute. Mr. Mills has over 3 decades career in the Army. Salute to you, including multiple active deployments locally and overseas. Post his active service, he has worked with the Department of Defense, developing strategies to grow the Australian defense workforce. He also led the delivery of the 20-year defense capability plan, the 2024 structure plan, working closely with senior leaders across Australian Defence Force, the Chief Defence Scientist, and Defence Science Technology Group. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you would agree with me that we could not have asked for a better panel today to enlighten us with their views on the topic advancing Australia-India Defence Industrial Cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Before I hand over the floor to the speakers, just a couple of administrative stipulations for all participants. Well, the time available is very premium. We need to wind up exactly in an hour. That is 1700 hours India time, 5 o'clock p.m. The time being a premium, I would request each speaker to take about 7 minutes to put forth their views. Please allow me to gently nudge you to wind up in case you are exceeding the time limit. I hope it will not happen. This is to afford adequate time for the question answer from our audience who are joining us, I'm told, from across the globe. And for the participants of the webinar, I'll request you to type your questions in the chat box, indicating your name, where are you attending this webinar from, and who do you wish to address your specific question. All the questions will be taken up after all the three speakers have made their remarks. So we will not let the participants, you can just put your question in the chat box and I'll read them out for you to the concerned speaker. So without further ado, I invite our first speaker, Captain Sarabjit Singh Parmar, to share his thought. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, General Dayal. And again, Cuts, good job. You always are at the pointed end of the spear that needs to poke holes and push things forward. But I'll just cut to the chase. And the moderator, General Dayal, mentioned the National Defence Strategy of Australia 2026. And I just like to highlight three issues that that emerge, that correlate to India. One, of course, is to seek Australia will seek and expand cooperation to advance regional peace, security, and prosperity. This includes strengthening maritime domain awareness, which is mentioned, operational interoperability, which is an ongoing process given the number of exercises we are doing between the three armed forces of both the countries, and of course, humanitarian assistance and emergency response cooperation, which is being an ongoing low-hanging fruit that both the countries have worked together. And of course, India is the top tier security partner, and interestingly says important defense partner in the Northeast Indian Ocean, which actually indicates to the area that Australia would like to concentrate on. And given the fact that the Indian Ocean is a huge area and there is interest in Northeast Indian Ocean, it's always a good start point. And with time, we do hope that the Australian interest does also come to the Northwestern Indian Ocean, which presently and has always been in turmoil, and presently it's totally on fire, and that's an area that we need to look at together. And then, of course, Australia will continue to support India's key role in the region and build interoperability by increasing depth, complexity, and frequency of our defense cooperation, which now also should transcend over to the industry. And then, of course, continue to pursue opportunities with India. And therefore, it is reciprocity in its kind. And we see that India and Australia have been working together on a lot of many things. And for the audience here, for those who are interested, the Indian Navy came out with the Indian Maritime Doctrine 2025, I think in December last year. and more recently with the Indian Maritime Security Strategy 2026 that takes over from the 2015 document, which I was party to in sort of writing. And both these documents highlight the importance of certain aspects that I would be talking about today. Of course, there has been immense upheaval since the 2025 meeting, and India and Australia today, even as we speak, are close to finalizing a new roadmap for maritime cooperation. And hopefully, a lot of the issues we are discussing and that have been in discussion over the years with focus on defense industry cooperation, both the countries should form an important part of this understanding. And therefore, both nations will continue to cooperate on resource sharing and capabilities in the Indian Ocean. But there are certain things that we need to understand, that given the turmoil that we are seeing and perhaps what can be looked upon as perhaps a reduced US importance, it is time that middle powers like India and Australia and other like-minded middle powers need to actually band together for the betterment of the Indo-Pacific. Having said that, let me look at one aspect in detail, and this covers the MDA and the UDA, that is the Maritime Domain Awareness and Underwater Domain Awareness aspect. We all know that the foreign ministers of the Quad countries are going to meet in New Delhi sometime later this month. The date is not known, and therefore that perhaps will give a review and the required push of the initiative of the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness, and perhaps there'll be clarity as to where does the US stand, what are India and Australia's positions, and what is Japan's positions, and therefore do the middle paths of India, Australia, and taking Japan on board need to push this agenda forward. Why do I say this? There is already a network in existence. One gap which I have been pointing out for some time is the lack of a fusion center in Australia. We have one in Japan, we have Singapore, we have in India, we have two in the Indian Ocean in Seychelles and in Madagascar. But I think the setting up of a fusion center in Australia, preferably one on Perth on the western coast to cover the southern Indian Ocean, and I'll explain why, and one on the east coast would actually develop a matrix which will strengthen the ongoing MDA matrix, but will also lay the foundations of an underwater domain awareness matrix, which requires certain explanation. There is a growing importance of the southern Indian Ocean, essentially for the rerouting of the sea lines of communication due to various reasons. One was, first of all, the Houthis' actions in the Red Sea. And now, of course, there are other options that are coming about and rerouting via the Cape. So when we see a rerouting of SLOCs, there is going to be the attendant threats, risks, and challenges, which requires a better maritime domain awareness matrix and an underwater domain awareness matrix. The other issue is China's presence. There has been Chinese ships that have gone around Australia. Therefore, it can be easily said that perhaps Chinese submarines have also been lurking in the region, as they have in the Indian Ocean region and the Bay of Bengal. The recovery of an underwater unmanned vessel in the Lombok Strait by an Indonesian fisherman, which as per some reports is part of an underwater surveillance system, actually should ring alarm bells that India and Australia need to look at the UDA in a much more comprehensive manner. So therefore, while the MDA linkages between India and Australia address the surface threats, there is a need to look at underwater activity, which remains barely monitored and increasingly contested. So therefore, technically, the underwater domain is the most challenging of all domains apart from space. And this is somewhere where India and Australia defense industries and even, private companies can work together, because the underwater domain is fast becoming the new frontier of strategic competition. Disruptions to critical undersea infrastructure, particularly submarine cables, can cripple financial systems and communication. Advances in submarine technologies and the proliferation of uncrewed underwater vessels are expanding the scope for covert operations, gray zone tactics, and strategic surprise. So how do India and Australia work together? To do this, they should identify, first of all, what are the complementary strengths that both the industries bring together, and when combined, optimize outcomes. India, from its side, can bring scale through industrial capacity, a growing defense manufacturing base, and operational experience across the Indian Ocean. Australia, on its part, can bring niche technological expertise, advanced research ecosystems. There's a lot of underwater companies in Australia. I was in Perth, and the University of Western Australia has a small laboratory that launches, an underwater vessel from Perth and recovers it at Colombo, and it monitors what is the Bethi profile. So in this way, both industries, both private enterprises can work together, and they can form the foundation for a robust and mutually reinforcing UDA partnership. However, beyond this, I'd like to identify 4 priority areas. This is part of a project that the CSTR, the think tank I'm with, and the Defense Security Institute of UWA. It's a 2-year project we're working on, funded by DFAT. We've identified 4 areas that India and Australia can work upon. One is anti-submarine warfare, uncrewed underwater vehicles, undersea search and rescue, and deep sea awareness. Now, ASW, or anti-submarine warfare, is central to deterrence. I've given the reason: the proliferation of submarines, not only Chinese, but the number of underwater vessels, under submarines that nations in the Indo-Pacific are procuring is just going to increase. So therefore, underwater submarine warfare is central to deterrence in an era of expanding undersea fleets. India is expanding its own submarine fleet, and Australia is looking at AUKUS. The base is going to be in Perth. So therefore, there's an importance again on how we look at this together in the Southern Indian Ocean and the Northeast Indian Ocean, where the Malacca Strait exits from the South China Sea side. Uncrewed underwater vehicles offer scalable and cost-effective means of surveillance and denial. And so therefore, this is one area I think actually the defense industries, public and private, of Australia and India can actually work upon. We've already had some of them talking to each other.
So I'll request you to wind up, sir.
1 minute I'll take. Undersea search and rescue capabilities. Last year, we've signed an agreement with Australia on submarine rescue. We've participated in an exercise in Singapore. Together with South Korea, Singapore, we can actually form a consortium to provide a good competitive or a good conglomerate of submarine rescue to nations who operate submarines. And the last is undersea awareness, which addresses one of the most underappreciated vulnerabilities. The Chinese are doing it, underwater mapping. We need to do it for protection of our critical maritime infrastructure, submarine cables, and for many other things. And therefore, knowing the domain in a similar way into the surface and air domains. And this is, I think, something that both the countries can do. The hydrographic services of both the navies have done a lot of work in the past. We just need to step it up to the next level. And thank you so much, General Dayal. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, sir. This was really very insightful and very thought-provoking, and the priority areas which you had identified, and some referring to deterrence, some referring to the and also the rerouting of slogs and Chinese presence and all that. How does it affect in our ecosystem and in the Indo-Pacific is really very well taken. Thank you very much for that. And now I invite Mr. Amit Shah to put forth his views.
Hello. Thank you, Anjali and the team at CUTS International at the outset for this opportunity. My respects to General Dayal for moderating, and thank him for his opening remarks and the introduction. Thanks to Captain Parmar for his strategic insights, and to, of course, Mr. Chris Mills for what I read, and of course what he's going to speak about is his work on defense and defense capability and research. It's an honor to be part of this forum. It's a strong panel, and I'm glad to contribute from an industry perspective. I'll come at this from a very practical, execution focused lens. From where we sit, the Australia-India defense relationship has clearly moved beyond intent. Like General Dayal Saab mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to see that firsthand during the roundtable in Sydney, where I had the privilege of interacting with Honorable Defense Minister Rajnath Singh Ji, and I thank again CUTS for that platform. The alignment is there. The strategic logic is there. The willingness to collaborate is there. But the constraint now is not alignment. The gap is simple. We are not converting fast enough. How do we convert this intent into actual deployable capability? Because if you look at it objectively, frameworks exist, dialogues exist, roundtables exist, but the translation into real industrial outcomes is still limited. And the gap is where most private sector players either slow down or stay out. So I want to focus on a very few specific friction points that we see on the ground. First, IP protection. In cross-border co-development environments, especially in aerospace and deep tech defense systems, IP is not a legal detail. It's a structural foundation. Right now, there is no clear, enforceable, cross-border IP protection mechanism that gives private players full confidence to collaborate at depth. And when that clarity is missing, what happens is predictable. Companies hold back, they modularize, they don't fully commit their core innovation. So, what we call co development today isn't really co development. There is also a broader reality here. Globally, we've seen in adjacent sectors, particularly technology, that large, well capitalized ecosystems can exert disproportionate pressure through legal, regulatory, and commercial means. Lawfare is no longer theoretical, it's a practical tool. In that environment, emerging collaborations like Australia and India need to be structurally protected. If the objective is to build a sovereign, resilient, and competitive defense industrial partnership, then safeguards around IP ownership, enforceability, and misuse need to move at the same speed as collaboration itself. Otherwise, the risk is not just hesitation, it's erosion of advantage. There is also a domestic dimension to this. As defense industrial collaboration deepens, the role of well-capitalized industrial players becomes critical. Not just in scaling capability, but in how they engaged with a very specific class of emerging platforms. In domains like aerospace and advanced defense systems, there are extremely few, arguably one or two platforms globally that are being built with three characteristics from day one: modular system architecture, cross-border industrial integration, and alignment to sovereign capability outcomes across corridors like Australia and India. These are not conventional startups, and they are not replicable inside large organizations. They are already structured to operate across corridors, integrating advanced engineering, manufacturing depth, and deployment pathways between countries. The question is how these platforms are engaged. In the default model, if the default model is control or absorption, the underlying architecture tends to get diluted and the overall execution velocity is lost. A more effective approach is structured alignment, where capital, access, long-term partnership frameworks are used to plug into these platforms without disrupting their design logic. That creates a fundamentally different outcome. Instead of building capability from scratch or fragmenting it through acquisition, industrial players can accelerate deployment by leveraging platforms that are already architected for bilateral execution. So, in the context of Australia and India cooperation, that becomes a force multiplier because it compresses timelines, preserves innovation integrity, and enables faster transition from concept to operational capability. Second, industrial interface mismatch. We are effectively trying to connect two ecosystems, Australia and India, without an unified industrial language. Standards differ, qualification processes differ, integration pathways differ. So even if when there is willingness to collaborate, execution becomes slow, expensive, and fragmented. And that directly impacts velocity. Third is regulatory and export friction. Speed is now a strategic advantage in defense. We all know that. But when cross-border collaboration gets caught in layers of approvals, compliance cycles, and regulatory uncertainty, the system will slow down. And in competitive geopolitical environment, delay is not neutral, it's a disadvantage. So if we step back, the issue is not whether Australia and India should collaborate. That part is settled. The real question is, how do we structure collaboration so that actually scales? Because the opportunity here is very real. Australia brings advanced systems, high-end research, test infrastructure, and unique test corridors huge test corridors. India brings manufacturing scale, cost efficiency, and the ability to industrialize rapidly. Individually, both are strong. Combined, this can become a globally competitive defense industrial stack, but only if the interfaces are solved. And those interfaces, are not abstract. They're very specific. IP protection, industrial standardization, supply chain integration, regulatory alignment. If those are addressed, you unlock real co-development and co-production. If they are not, we remain in a cycle of continuous dialogue without depth. From an industry standpoint, what we are seeing is that private players are ready to move. The capital is interested, the technology exists, the intent is aligned, but execution confidence is still conditional. So, to summarize, this is not a question of collaboration anymore. It is a question of coordinated capability creation. Because in today's environment, capability gaps don't stay theoretical, they get exploited. And systems that move slower than the threat landscape don't remain relevant. When that happens, dependency doesn't just increase, it concentrates control elsewhere. And that is not a position any sovereign democratic partnership can afford to drift into. So, this is not about frameworks or future intent. It's about whether we build fast enough, protect well enough, and execute tightly enough. Because someone else does it better, before someone else does it better, cheaper, or quietly makes us dependent on it. On that, I close my comments and thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Shah, and for sharing your expertise with us. And your nuanced understanding of the aerospace industry ecosystem has given us a lot of pointers. The converting intent to action obviously is the thing at the table. And the IP and the modular nature, cross-border and alignment, sovereignty, all those things are very well taken. And I'm sure the depth of your insights have given us much to reflect upon. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, General Sir.
Now I call upon our third speaker, Mr. Chris Mills, to enlighten us with his views.
Thank you very much, General. And I echo Amit's comments. It's a privilege to be here discussing a really important topic for both nations with this esteemed group. I'll just echo a couple of comments earlier on, and then I want to get to some of the challenges that Amit rightly identified that must be addressed. But it must be addressed in a fundamental different approach to the one that's got us here. We've made good progress since the comprehensive agreement back in 2020, but it's still relatively slow. And we're going to have to increase the rate of progress to actually bring real effect to this partnership as it relates to a deteriorating security context within our neighbourhood. Just very quickly, we're moving, and both yourself and the person who introduced the panel identified, we're moving from just being partners of opportunity to being partners of necessity, where actions and policies needs to be translated into action and impact in our region to bring about collective security. But importantly, nowadays, security can't and should not be devoid of economic prosperity. You need both for a long-term partnership. Really importantly, there is great opportunity, but it requires commitment. In terms of some perspective, the University of New South Wales is one of Australia's largest universities, a global top 20 university that was established at the end of World War II to rebuild Australia's engineering expertise. Since that time, it's had a partnership with Defence and defence research. and we're committed to bringing real impact to this opportunity. In fact, the university is opening its first overseas campus in Bengaluru in August this year. Not just about an educational offering, but establishing a launch pad for education, research collaboration, and innovation. Now, the University of New South Wales is strong in a lot of areas, but particularly strong in areas that reflect AUKUS Pillar 2 capabilities and areas identified in the 2025 Ministerial Dialogue around quantum, space, AI and autonomous systems, and undersea and maritime systems. In fact, there are more quantum scientists per head of population in Sydney than any other place in the world. So that represents great opportunity when we look to partner Australian research with an Indian STEM population that brings scale and innovation to bring real world impact. But Amit rightly identified a whole bunch of challenges around IP, around industrial frameworks, around government will. And we could spend a decade trying to unpick those if we rely on historical patterns of solving these types of problems. Moving forward, we have to identify quick wins where both countries are prepared to accept some risk based on trust. University of New South Wales is a good example. It's prepared to commit to establishing a campus and prepared to commit to establishing research partnerships to make a real difference from August this year. But that trust needs to be replicated by, the partners that we'll undertake collaboration with India around IP protection, around bringing co-development to co-production to a shared ecosystem to share reward to both partners and hopefully to bring realistic, meaningful impact to the security and prosperity of both nations. I'm very keen to hear the perspective of the other people on this panel on some first move opportunities to exploit the University of New South Wales presence in Bangalore. I think opportunities around collaboration in some areas that we are pioneering around edge computing on maritime platforms where they can understand localized weather conditions to move with sea currents rather than against it, to OLED technology, magnetometers, to actually bring quantum sensing to scale at economic cost to make a meaningful impact of undersea warfare. There are plenty of opportunities, but I think it requires government commitment around solving some of the problems that are identified as an absolute priority. And in the meantime, it requires companies, defence forces and governments to accept some risk based on trust and a requirement to partner to make a difference, because we can't wait to solve these problems the way we have done in the past. I'll leave my comments there, and I look forward to engaging in ongoing discussion once we've heard what the rest of the panelists have had to say.
Well, thank you very much. It was really engaging presentation, very clear, compelling, and rich with your insights of opportunities versus commitment, then the opportunities for education, research, collaboration, innovation. And since you mentioned about AUKUS 2, I would like to also maybe ask a question on that, but that was really engaging. And thank you very much for giving both depth and clarity to a very complex subjects. And I'm very sure your other aspects about the first movers advantage, etc., we will take it up with the panel. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all our speakers for those rich and diverse perspectives. we now have some time for questions and answers, and I'm very glad that the speakers have been keeping absolutely to the time, maybe just a couple of minutes over, but we have now got some time for the questions and discussion. And I would encourage the audience to keep your questions very brief and focused. Just type them out in the chat box so that we can accommodate as many interventions as possible. Okay. So we come down to the question, and I'm like tempted after hearing this thing. This question is specifically to Mr. Chris, and also I would request Captain Sarabjit to also elaborate on it. The first question that's from my side is, Australia is currently deep into the AUKUS Pillar 2 technology stream, and this framework explicitly excludes India. Does this create a strategic ceiling sort of a thing on how deep Australia, India underwater cooperation can realistically go? Or can bilateral agreements independently achieve meaningful outcomes? To what extent can India be integrated into the maritime autonomous system R&D without running into the walls of AUKUS specific export controls? I mean, this is a thing which has been bothering my mind. So I'll request a very brief intervention on both of you. So first, we'll request Mr. Chris to go ahead on this.
So, General, I would look at Australia's partnership in AUKUS as an opportunity. AUKUS removes a bunch of ITAR restrictions that had previously restricted our ability to exchange research and technical data between the US and Australia. Opening that up means that Australian researchers and industry can collaborate more easily with the US. I don't think it prohibits bilateral cooperation whatsoever, and indeed the Quad specifically focuses on doing more in terms of the partnership between Japan, Australia, India, and the US for shared security outcomes in the Indo-Pacific. So I think a bilateral partnership with Australia, particularly around maritime awareness and undersea warfare, presents an opportunity to integrate our partnership and collaboration into an allied framework that looks to achieve a similar operational and strategic outcome. I think AUKUS just represents an opportunity to accelerate opportunities around the Quad.
I think Captain Sarabjit, sir.
Yeah, so the AUKUS has got two pillars. So the second pillar, which looks at certain 6 technological aspects, and it includes underwater also and cyber and all, lays open a whole field in which Australia can collaborate with many nations. A lot of that work we're already doing, and we're already discussing at least 3 or 4 of those technological aspects. So there is freedom in which Australia can maneuver to engage other countries insofar as the AUKUS second pillar is concerned. So therefore, there is merit in what Mr. Chris Mills has said, that Australia can look at cooperating with India on specific issues on an industry basis.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll now take on a few questions which have been typed by our participants. One is, of course, a comment by Mr. Dalveer Lawat. He says that Australia and India should cooperate to deter China, or they have a natural intent to maintain rules-based order on freedom of navigation. Well, point taken. Everyone is concerned about that. And China is actively using gray zone tactics. Both Australia and India have indicated gray zone in their strategies released recently. What specific gray zone activities Australia and India can develop? I really don't know if we need to discuss it here, but we are looking at Mr. Alawat. Actually, we are looking at industrial cooperation. We are not going into the operational or tactical domain of gray zone, etc. So while your observations are absolutely right, we will pass that on. Now we come to a question by Master Shivam. He's a PhD candidate in Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, JNU. He's got some incisive questions. Firstly, a question to Mr. Amit Shah. How can local chambers of commerce, state investment agencies, and regional industry bodies be brought into a structured dialogue alongside national defense establishments? Yeah,
Thank you,
so
sir.
your industry perspective, please.
Thank you, General Saab. That's a great question. I think I thank Shivam for that. The issue is not lack of stakeholders. It's a lack of structure at the moment. Right now, local chambers, state agencies, and regional industry bodies operate in parallel to national defense frameworks, not within them. So the shift required is from participation to integration. Now, how do you get there? Practically that means three things. First, create a tiered engagement model where national defense sets the priorities. State and regional bodies align to specific capability segments where there is that regional expertise, manufacturing, supply chain, testing, workforce, and all of that. Second, move from open dialogue forums to program linked engagement. If there is no program, there is no continuity. So you are having discussions and dialogues in one silos, and that's getting, overcome by other larger discussions. So if there is no program, there is no continuity. So participation should be tied into defined projects, not just discussions. Third, establish a single coordination interface. Without that, industry bodies get fragmented signals and duplication sets in. So what I mean is, so coming into referencing what Mr. Mills said, and I think he's got a great point there, wherein when we build trust, what is that trust? Below that trust, that entire framework has to work. And that trust is that document that we both countries sign. And from the framework of that should slice away into defense, slice away into industry, slice away into these bodies. So a joint India-Australia coordinated layer aligned to defense objectives can anchor that document at the start. And if structured this way, local and regional bodies don't just participate, they become executional layers within the national framework. And that's when collaboration actually scales. So, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I think I'll request everyone else to please keep your mics on mute, please. Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. Shah. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So I'm just building on what Chris said earlier. It is incredible that we are at this stage where these two countries are really gelled together. We have extremely great encounters when we meet. There's a lot of great discussion between both defense, ministers. It's always a pleasure to be in the room when Australia and India meet. And there's so much resonance. There's so much reciprocity that we always want to, think that, oh, this is the point where these things will change. But like the question says in itself, that how do you want these local governments, local chambers of commerce to get involved, is to subscribe and get subscribed to that framework that the national defense can basically design, so that they can start subscribing to those segments or sectors that they apply to. I hope that answers the question. That's in my mind.
Yeah, of course. I think you covered it very well. If there's any follow-up question, Shivam, you could possibly type that again, but I think it's been very wonderfully answered. Again, a question by the same gentleman, Shivam, is to Mr. Chris Mills. Can subnational governments in India and Australia directly engage with one another to advance defense cooperation, and where do you see the most practical opportunities? So I think the first part is almost like a known thing to everyone, but the second part I think would be an interesting take on you from your side, Mr. Mills.
So I would suggest yes, we can, but in terms of moving it forward, there needs to be some type of government agreement that sets the framework for these discussions to occur without risk. Now, I think, our respective science organisations, Defence Science and Technology Group in Australia and their counterpart in India, provide a good opportunity to identify key areas that we are prepared to share our research on and collaborate on and develop on, and then engage in industry and academia and build a number of quick wins that can support us in identifying how we expand on this framework so it can be scaled more broadly across the two national ecosystems. I go back to trust. When we develop this framework, we need to build a trust organisation or trust organisations within it that check to ensure people are doing the right thing so that they don't undermine trust. Now, as an example, Australia has held a very privileged security partnership with the US for many, many decades. But when we acquire privileged US technology, the US still sends inspection teams to check how we're storing it, to check our security arrangements. Now, that's not because they don't trust us, but it's to ensure that we're meeting that trust obligation. I think it'll be important when we establish sort of governmental and industry frameworks that we establish a trust framework to enforce trust throughout the various layers. Really importantly, but I do think there's great opportunity, particularly around our presence in Bengaluru and about identifying some quick wins as it relates to undersea technologies, particularly around autonomous domain awareness or autonomous systems. I think there's an opportunity to co-develop technology, to bring it to mass scale production, to have meaningful effects. Australia's done that well with the OCS Blue Bottle system and with the Go Shark. I think there's no reason that we couldn't collaborate and co-produce similar systems between Australia and India that scale across the expanse of the Indian Ocean.
Captain Sarabjit has got something to add, please.
Yeah, so there was something called the Australia-India Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative Partnership. It's quite a mouthful, AIPOIP. And a lot of grants were given by the Australian government for entities of India and Australia to work together, for which you needed to forward proposals. So one is you needed somebody in Australia who would be the main lead agency. A lot of NGOs, a lot of think tanks, a lot of, I think startups also got together. A lot of issues were pushed, like pollution control and all that. So there are a lot of avenues which are still available for this to happen. I'm not sure whether it will proliferate into defense because there are certain sensitivities involved, but at least, the ecosystem had got off the ground where you had the smaller players in both countries talking to each other and forming a bridge and working. So that sort of an ecosystem perhaps can be further developed.
Perfect. One question I had, and I'm sure a lot of people must be having, and I'm addressing this to Mr. Amit Shah. See, critical mineral supply chains, and we already mentioned about China's intervention and all. Particularly the rare earth elements, which are essential for aerospace components and also for radar systems and advanced electronics, they are strategic choke points which are dominated by China. How concretely are Australia and India converting their complementary resource endowment into a joint supply chain that reduces this dependence? Is there anything being done on it? Because this is a thing which keeps coming to our mind. Yeah, Mr. Shah.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to look at the button. Yeah. Thank you, General Saab. Look, there is a lot being talked about this, and of course we work closely with both ex-ISRO and CSIRO on the Australian side. There has been a lot of talk of between the suppliers of how this is going to be managed on a scale where the kind of scale that we are looking at now, given that we are past Jan and Feb of 2026, which has been a great eye-opener for most of the sovereign countries in the world, sovereign capability of the countries in the world, there is definitely a bottleneck. I will not deny that. But there are alternate sources which obviously Australia is part of and is continuously looking at bringing their home-built, how do I put this? Their local resources, which they do mine for many years, which have been exported to bear in Australia. And if that is something that is going to play a vital role in bringing down prices of the components that we are looking at, uh, which obviously even the US is after, we have to understand that between India and Australia, there is not going to be if we cooperate in the way which we think we should, given the diplomatic differences right now with, of course, I'm talking about the elephant in the room, China. And if that is going to be affected in any way with the new diplomacy policies, this could be a partnership that will take us out of that bottleneck very soon. So I think I'm going to hint a bit, but can't put it into
Yeah, I
very
understand.
specific
No, we all understand that.
outcomes here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I
So
hope.
I think this we will. We have a lot of time. Now we have a very little time now. In fact, I was coming to a last question, and also we are looking at our senior advisor, the General Lamba, who is also there. I wonder if we can patch in his audio somehow coming in. Sir,
General
yeah,
Dayal, can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you, sir.
Oh,
Yeah.
you can't see me. That's fair enough. That's okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, General Dayal, for giving me this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to hear stalwarts like Captain Sarabjit and Amit, I've heard earlier, Mr. Chris Mills probably hearing for the first time. You know, we had a dialogue, General Dayal, about a month back, opening up this very passage of cooperation with Australia. Because before that, a number of industrial details had come in as to who's dealing with what things and what could inspire India to cooperate. So that while that gateway has been opened, General Dayal, my view is there is a contradiction somewhere where there is a perception that we are not fully integrated yet in Australia because Australia's perspective is so closely related to the United States that anything intervention by India has to be acceptable to the United States. That's my informal personal reading. That's why it was rightly brought out that AUKUS 2 prohibits or does not allow India to integrate fully into the AUKUS. And if that is not sort of resolved, Mr. Mills, I think we would be delaying this process, which started in 2009, went on to a strategic partnership in 2020, and was a comprehensive partnership 2025. But if you see the slack between 2020 and 2025, General Dayal, you'll agree that the speed or the pace of work has been very slow. Very categorically, even in the 2+2 ministers dialogue and the preceding events, a lot has been clearly said, particularly to focus on defense, technologies, defense, both strategic levels of defense as also tactical levels of defense. There are areas where we can truly optimize. And Mr. Amit Shah made a beautiful point. I think I'm going to reinforce there are two parallels functioning independently. Till these integrate, until the industry from India and the industry from Australia, they come on a parallel cover, which is comprised of both the Australian guidelines and the Indian guidelines. This would not get patched or integrated, which means anything that is said here or by the industry is not finding its way into the government channel. Our channel should be strong enough and potent enough. Whatever is said here and suggested should automatically not only be elevated to the government structure, the organization, but also come back full circle to say, oh, yes, this is indeed appropriate and important, and we should adopt it. So I think these are the 2 points. One is the pace. There are no dearth. There are umpteen number of areas we can cooperate. Submarines to torpedoes to undersea. I think there is a domain that Australia really excels in. But there are those areas where India excels. We could put this together and integrate it with the army channel that gives us a faster leeway to execute more than just think and keep planning. Thank you, General Dayal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And in fact, we are at the edge of our time, actually, but I can't let there's one question put in by my very good friend Vaibhav Gupta, who's also there. But I'll just read out that question to you so that all of you can get a sense. And earlier, Shivam had also asked something similar there. I'll just read out the question and maybe make us and maybe request Mr. Chris to just give a two-line kind of an answer. So Mr. Vaibhav Gupta says, while India itself is giving a lot of benefit to promote innovation, how can Indian innovators collaborate with Australian counterparts, and how India will treat for Make in India, or we've got these categories of indigenously designed, developed, and manufactured, and is there any way or is there any mechanism for Australian government to fund such innovations? And just to add from my side, how do we ensure that India is following a Make in India policy and Australia is also following sovereign industrial capability, if I'm not telling it wrongly? So don't they become protectionist barriers to one another? Can we envision a green channel kind of a thing for at least the defense components between our two nations? Maybe just a couple of lines intervention, Mr. Mills, if you can.
First of all, I'm an optimist. So I believe the pace of change is increasing, and we'll find solutions to the challenges that Amit eloquently outlined earlier on. I think it starts with trade opportunities between our two governments to explore the low-hanging fruit, the areas where we can collaborate. Yes, the Indian government rightfully wants to provide for the prosperity of Indians in India with a Made in India policy, likewise in Australia. But there's a good example with the Megami frigate, where the first 3 frigates for the Australian Navy are going to be produced in Japan, and the remainder will be produced in Australia, that benefits both population bases. I think India brings a scale of manufacturer that Australia is just not capable of doing. And the ability to scale in conflict is strategically important, as been demonstrated in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. I think having that industrial base that can scale to support Australia is strategically important. So identifying opportunities to identify how we can get some quick wins on the board, I think is important.
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, there are many more aspects like cyber and other domains, but I'm very sorry that we are totally out of time. And let me just, to end this thing, we say that we definitely see a clear convergence on how both India and Australia view the evolving strategic landscape of Indo-Pacific, and we need to do a lot more. In fact, the very common phrase about moving from dialogue to delivery is now what is there, like as it came out through joint R&D, co-development, deeper industrial perspective, and all those things. The partnership is not merely complementary, but it is transformative. And if it is supported by the right policy framework and industry linkages and sustained political will, I think the cooperation between India and Australia can go to the next level. On that level, I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers for giving out these valuable perspectives, and all our participants for giving out these questions and having a truly enriching discussion. Thank you very much. Now I hand over to Ms. Anjali. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the panel for their rich and diverse remarks. Thank you to the chair and moderator. We couldn't have asked for a better moderator. Thank you for the thought-provoking questions to the audience. Hope with this discourse we are able to bring out some tangible outcomes. This is just the start. We hope to maintain this momentum, and we hope that we have a similar physical roundtable like we did in Sydney. We have one here in India. Until then, we hope that we would continue these discussions and deliberations. Thank you to everyone. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you.